Last time on Wanderlust. Basically, messages go out from this Eco Urb that just goes like, we're cutting the rail tracks to our Eco Urb. Yeah, we're on our own now. We're not paying you back.
And while the government is realizing, like, what are we going to do to fix that? Companies are probably starting to turn to them and being like, they aren't paying us.
So they're like, okay, we're going to suit up who we have. We're going to send them out and just do like a show of force to retake this Eco Urb and be like, you have to pay this. But then like as they start going out, like all the Eco Urbs that are like on their path are just kind of like, we're not going to help you. The government's like, we're not sending any more people off. We're cutting them off. We'll just keep our like 20 Eco Urbs we have. But every time a new one goes dark, the corporation's like, you got to send a military out.
This is the way that personnel resources to repair them without using like company resources is done by transporting people like riverboat to riverboat.
This would only really be effective in daytime, so nighttime battles these wouldn't really work. It's basically just a magnifying glass, but it like focuses the light so much that it's basically a little laser.
I think one of the biggest tenets that comes out of this first one is the freedom of information.
Okay, librarian, I get it, but yeah.
We don't need the one person. We can have a group of people who all have prominent positions in the community. Like, somebody has to be in charge of like the scheduling for the gardens.
Eco Urbs that can communicate via satellites. A lot of transportation is done through riverboats. There's patchwork rail between some of them, and there really is no longer a centralized government, right?
2 more moons collide.
But I think there is some moon debris that falls down.
Significant damage to the rail system. And then the satellites get hit by the debris field and come crashing down, and all the communication globally goes dead. Last time we discussed the era that basically preceded Eco Urbs being nice and kind of the journey into Eco Urbs being an actual pleasant place to live. So where we had stopped last time, society had fully moved to Eco Urbs. The desert cities are all but abandoned. Maybe there's some lingering people there, but for all purposes, no. That no one's there. There's a few Eco Urbs that are still technically like the originals, the ones that stuck with the government, you know, but it's like, that's a joke at this point, you know? It's kind of like, you know, you talk about being part of like the British Empire, like, nah, okay, you're an island again, like, calm down, calm down, Australia, you know? So, where we ended, 2 moons collided, suggested by the I am biased, lovely Mandy.
I, who am not biased, also think she's lovely.
I'm on the fence. I'm just kidding, Andy. I love you.
Creating a ring of debris that destroyed a bunch of satellites, causing all of the communication to stop, and also rained debris down on the Eco Urbs. It damaged a lot of rail. It created some infrastructure issues within Eco Urbs that had been functioning largely independently for a long time. And now society is kind of having to scramble as a group to figure out how to solve this problem. And that's kind of where we're kicking it off today. None of you could see that, but I just pantomimed a kicking motion. And our videos are chest up. So, sorry about that. No one got to see my kicking motion. How do we feel like this gets resolved?
I have a great idea.
I'm all ears.
This is the first time... Oh, my body's a little loud. Let me check that, sorry.
Zach's off the podcast. Zach's been fired. Caitlin, get a new husband.
Wow, okay. It's a little short notice.
Dramatic.
Oh, just start shopping, all right? You'll be able to find somebody.
This is the first time in history they start trying to domesticate birds, since birds are, like, large predators typically in this world. And even, like, smaller ones, people are just, like, against.
Now, I love that idea. I am unbelievably confused how domesticated birds solves the issue of damaged rail and no satellites.
It solves the issue because basically they train carrier pigeons.
Oh, okay.
So
I was going to say, as soon as he said domesticate birds, like, oh, carrier pigeons. Like, I don't know why you didn't get that immediately.
I thought they were going to be writing them, like, what is Skyward Sword?
Well,
that would be hilarious.
wait, no, that's even better though, actually, though.
do you know what I find really upsetting about that suggestion, Zach? It's a good suggestion. It's a good suggestion, and it's one that I don't have a good rebut to, other than to say introducing flight into my game about walking through a forest really nerfs that a little bit.
No, I think the thing is, like, it's, like, dangerous, and, like, these birds, like, if we're using them for riding, these birds are big to carry humans, so they can't, like, go through a forest.
That's what he said. That feels hand-wavy, but I'll allow it for right now. I gotta think of some things about the birds.
I mean, I don't think they're as common as horses or as happy to be domesticated. You know what I mean? Like, people have domesticated a wolf, but that doesn't mean that, like, most wolves are going to be domesticated. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. I like it now. I got some things. It's a stopgap method. So I like this as, you know, one eco herb, maybe one that's like, what's like, bravery is the dumber side of caution or something like that. What's that expression? You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Courage is, or what's the better part of valor?
Yeah, something's the better part of valor.
That's retreat. Retreat is the better part of valor.
That's not what he's going for.
Well, anyways, yeah, but this eco herb was like, bravery is the dumber part of reason, and decides to,
so these are the Gryffindors.
Yeah, these are the Gryffindors. You know, there's a building on fire, like, I'm going in! Like, you're naked and covered in Vaseline, Gryffindor. Like, doesn't matter! Going for it!
Yeah, so I think I would say that, like, the, like, birds for, like, actual flying of humans is, like, pretty rare, and it's just, like, used occasionally for town-to-town travel, since rails are impossible now. But I think smaller birds, people are like, well, we aren't dumb and don't want to, like, ride a giant bird, but there are smaller birds that aren't actively eating us that we could, like, tie notes to and send them back and forth.
I do like the idea of these being rather hostile and reptilian birds, though. Like small feathered dragons, basically. And that being, I don't know what to call it, like a mailman. So, you know, there's the movie The Mailman, where, like, mailmen are cool because... Sorry, we have listeners that are mailmen. I'm gonna apologize for what I just said about mailmen. I actually really respect the profession.
You didn't say anything about mailmen. You started to say something about mailmen, and then you stopped.
Well... Yeah, I did.
No, he said, you know, it's a movie about mailmen where they're actually cool, is what he said.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Hey, Zach, I don't need you to dig my grave for me, alright? My point is, it's a movie about making a mailman cool because it's like starting up communication again in a post-apocalypse, which this really isn't. But I like the idea of being you know, like a mail bird person, a courier trainer, you know? As being, like, they all have, like, one missing finger, you know? They all have some burns. There's just claw and bite marks on them constantly as they're strapping messages to these birds that are like, just ripping at them, you know? I like a violent carrier pigeon.
I just love how every time Cody's like, we're making a utopia, and then Cody makes everyone just into, like grease monkeys for different jobs. Like,
this happened in World Shop one time where we did some world where it was like describe a utopia, and it was basically like mine was just hillbillies. It was like everyone driving like crappy trucks and demo derbies, and that was what like society was built around. And he's like, I don't think that's the tone I thought we were going for. I'm like, well, you said utopia to me, so I'm sorry I find iPhone future boring. I want rusty cars smashing into each other, but everyone's friends. It's like Mad Max without the horrible stuff is, you know, my utopia. Anyways, which I think is just Australia. Should we move?
Yes, but that's another conversation.
Not for the reasons you want.
So, you have an initial form of communication starting up. So communication's slow, but it is possible to get, you know, a message from Eco Urb to Eco Urb to Eco Urb through a patchwork of birds and riverboats. What does society do about 1, no more satellites, and 2, damaged rail?
I think, like, even though we have established communication, everybody is really isolated. It's not, the birds are not an equivalent fix for the satellite thing.
Well, yeah, because we basically had internet cafes, right? Like, that was where...
Right, yeah, it was instantaneous, and It was mostly audio, but I think we had started to have video.
Yeah, it was getting better as the Eco Urbs were. That was like one of the things that the new wave of Eco Urbs was offering, was better and more robust communication and actual data transfer. So this would be a loss, because it used to maybe be that you would be able to have, at the very least a pen pal. At best, what we're literally doing right now, where we're all sitting on a Discord call, like that's 90% of my interaction with you guys. So having that suddenly cut off and be back to maybe you can get a letter through is a significant difference for sure.
So I think that the Eco Urbs that stayed as like a nation, they're probably, okay, so stepping back a little bit, I think those ones are probably all like clustered pretty close together, and
they would have all been closest to the desert.
Let's say varies between 5 to 10 Eco Urbs per nation for the ones that actually like stuck around. I think because those nations, those Eco Urbs decided to stay together, they have a little bit more, what's the right word for this? Variety. I think they have a little bit more variety of what they are able to do. So they're all supporting each other, which means that they are able to have like a pseudo NASA type thing where it's like they're able to get the people together to at least fix the satellites. Because if you're going to have a nation of 5 to 10 Eco Urbs that can't talk to each other in a convenient way, you're going to lose that really fast.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's actually kind of a fun, rewriting their own history a little bit, as, the Eco Urbs that stuck together the most were the ones that technically kind of had this, old, almost, nationalist heritage, oh, we were the ones that stuck with everybody. Those other ones are the rebels, right? And then, when this happens, are the ones that are managed to,
pull something together.
Marshal the other Eco Urbs a little bit. Yeah, so, they're kind of the original administrators of what ends up becoming, what do we want to name this planet's space program, by the way? We get to name a space program?
No, give us some time to think about that.
No, it's got to be off the cuff, guys. All right, we're going around, round robin. Caitlin, you're first, because you're first in my little Discord window here. Give me a name for a space program.
I need the list of moon goddesses. It's got to be something with the moon.
No, we got to name it after the sun. I'm so mad about that still. The frickin' moon landings or the Apollo program and not the Artemis program. Artemis, the goddess of the moon. No, we name it after the god of the sun for some unknown reason.
It's because it's a guy, probably, if I'm going to be honest.
Oh, 100%.
That you're not wrong.
It's 100% that, but it makes me so mad.
Oh my gosh, what did I call your cult last time, by the way?
It is hang on, I wrote it down. Solar Correctionists.
The Solar Correctionists is what I'm calling. That's my vote for a space program name.
Also, they're not my cult. They're my tinfoil hats because I'm making a cult this time.
What do you mean?
I have a cult. There's going to be a cult that form. We just haven't got to talking about it yet, but I want to make a cult.
Oh, I thought this was your cult.
No.
Do you want a cooler cult?
No, the first one was my conspiracy theorists,
Oh.
I'm making a religious cult now.
Oh, gotcha. I figured that tied into some kind of religious belief, but, all right. All right, Caitlin, come on.
The Novaran Atmospheric and Stellic Association.
Is that still NASA?
Yes.
It sure is.
Caitlin's fired Zach, get a new wife.
No, I'm going to keep her. She's pretty great.
Mandy, I got bad news for you. You're next.
So the one of the goddess names that I had come up with is Exula.
Uh-huh.
And I don't have a acronym for that, but I just like that name.
I gotta find the name.
So
we could call it the Exula program.
The Exula program.
Or the Exula project.
Yeah, something like that would be.
And astronauts are called Exulians.
Okay, way to kill that idea.
I like Exulians. And then our brave Exulians step onto the carcass of the shattered satellite. It's actually pretty, I like it.
I like the Exula project.
The Exula project is good, though. We can name astronauts later. All right, Zach, hit me.
Where are the name of the moon goddesses?
I wrote them down on a physical piece of paper.
Mandy, you're not helping.
It's because the satellites are down.
Well, Zach, you can't just do Moon God Project. That one's taken. You gotta do something else.
I think it's called the Duo Project because there's two suns.
Okay, Vinny, hit me.
Space Force.
All right, we're doing a vote. Who votes for NASA, but with worse names. Show of hands. Mandy, why are you voting for not York?
Because I love it.
Okay, we all get 2 votes. Who's voting for NASA, but with worse names? Okay, that's 3 votes. Who's voting for Exula Project? Okay, that's 5 votes. Who's voting for the Duo Project?
Or another weird name for project.
Okay, Duo something, but we get it. Okay, who's voting for that?
I'm voting for mine. I'm not just leaving it.
All right, 1 Space Force. Who's voting for that?
I used my 2 votes already.
Yeah, I already used
All right, Exula Project wins.
Yeah, I already liked the ones that came before mine, so let's say anything so we can move on.
Perfect. Minnie, that's efficient, and I appreciate that about you. All right, so Exula Project is formed to relaunch relaunch satellites or repair the satellites that are up there. So this is kind of a redo of the space program that has probably been gone for pushing 100 years at this point. I mean, it's been a long time that the satellites have been up there, and they did not continue questing out into space at that point. So now I have some questions.
Well, before we move on, can I add something? Or can I?
Oh, man, yeah, because I just got questions about it, so yeah.
So I think, or in my mind, the nation ones were kind of like, oh, we don't like the rebels and stuff, and they're kind of rewriting their own history a little bit. But I think out of all the Eco Urbs, they're the ones that struggle the most with just surviving, because they were used to like heavy oversight, and all of a sudden like, you have nothing. Something breaks, they have no idea how to fix it at all. Where the other Eco Urbs, where it's like communication being down was like inconvenient but not like life threatening. The reason they're like,
yeah, because they were supposed to be discreet. Yeah.
Right. The nation ones are kind of like, we need to launch satellites because we are talking to no one and we are starving.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
Yeah, that's kind of, I don't know if I made that clear when I was describing it, but I definitely think they like heavily rely on each other. This isn't like I don't think the national ones can be self-sufficient at the moment if they ever become self-sufficient.
Cool. I like it. I'm a fan. Okay. So we have them trying to start a space program. Now, starting a space program is pretty resource intensive, and you need a lot of people who are very smart in very specific areas, which is to say they might not have a NASA's worth of people in their 5 Eco Urbs, right? So they're going to have to be at least getting people, also probably resources from either other Eco Urbs or the wild. So how do we think that kind of supply line works, cramming resources down to a rocket that they can use to fly into orbit, which is a pretty big undertaking?
So right off the bat, I think that they use the riverboats heavily to get supplies from some of these self-sustaining Eco Urbs. And I think what it is the national ones promise that they are going to be able to provide communication again.
Yeah.
In lieu of like money or anything right now for the supplies and the, I'm losing words. Manpower supplies, and the materials. Yeah.
So they start becoming like also mailmen, but not the cool bird ones.
No, the lame ones.
Well, it depends on like how heavy the materials are. Like if we're talking like a bunch of iron, you're probably going to want to use like a riverboat.
Right, because it floats and it's...
Well, I mean, the communication they're promising, are they promising the future communication, or are they promising like, we'll take a bag of letters to all these other places we're going to?
I would have assumed like once the satellites are up, like it's a free-for-all.
They're not paying for these resources because, look, we're going to get the satellites working again and you'll be able to talk to people again. I like that idea a lot because it kind of serves as a way to kind of mend fences with these two... like groups, breaks and Eco Urbs that now have to work together to just because they all want to be able to email each other again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I also think they're only asking for materials to build a rocket. But I think there are people perceptive enough to realize like, you guys are starving, and just like, oh no, we left a bag of corn on your deck and you sailed away.
Yeah, that's nice.
And it's like they start like showing like gestures of good faith, like, the other Eco Urbs are like, no, we're not living in a capitalist society anymore. We're trying to save, like, we're all trying to live on this planet. We're not just going to leave you to die.
Yeah, we have an extra bag that we can spare, so we'll do that because, you know, you definitely need it.
Right.
And I think that works. I think that makes sense. I like that as, like, a societal thing at this time. I think that's a good idea. So beyond that, do we think that they do more work on the infrastructure of the planet to allow for an easier supply line, right? So right now it's a patchwork of, riverboats taking it to what's left of rail. Do we think there's any more effort made at Eco Urb to Eco Urb infrastructure?
If there is, I don't think it's until like the end of this era.
Okay.
I think kind of like the big focus is...
So the infrastructure takes a backseat to the... Oh, hit me with the name one more time. I forgot it already.
The Exula project.
Exula project. I like that. Okay. So things are a little bit ramshackled right now.
Well, I think the riverboats are can hold large amounts of supply, so they're just like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Sure, but you got to think there's not necessarily a river that runs from the Eco Urb that has the supply directly to the place where they're building a rocket, which would probably be in the desert.
Well, and I think
there's nothing there.
I was gonna say, but they can send it to the coast because these Eco Urbs were close to the nation centers. Well, I guess it is the desert.
No, the ones that stayed we stayed with the cities are the
inland,
furthest from water. Yeah, they're the most inland.
Oh, okay.
That's why, one of the reasons they would be struggling to survive, because their Eco Urbs are always the most tenuous, and then, they're the furthest from water in general.
I think roads, it sounds simple, but, roads made a huge difference in the Roman Empire.
No, I mean, I think that might be a thing that they, are reusing, dusted over old roads to try to, get supplies out there, just to kind of, keep going on what they have. It's very recycled, and what do we have laying around that we can use to do this?
Well, and so what I was going to say is I think as they're being forced to work together again, it becomes really apparent to the people that are in charge of the different Eco Urbs that okay, these ways are okay, but is there a way that we could do Eco Urb to Eco Urb transportation that doesn't hurt the planet, is it an individual thing? Can we get a rail system back up that's not what we used to use, but maybe high speed or whatever is a more green way of doing that? And I think that's why it ends up taking until the end of this era for that to either get started or...
Yeah, that makes sense. They have a lot of things they have to be working on right now, and the most important one is communication again. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, because, you might not be able to, if an Eco Urb is struggling, they wouldn't be able to tell you until it, is maybe too late or whatever. So, becomes very critical. And also it's what, everyone's clamoring for because it was how people talked between Eco Urbs.
Well, I think there's a lot, we didn't point this out before. I think there's a lot of disconnect between families, I think families...
At least extended families, sure. Yeah, you didn't necessarily end up at the same place.
Right, and not even just extended for us now means our parents. But, it's oh, you're a 20-something, you're going to go sign up for an Eco Urb that looks nice. And then, you're cut off from them completely. It's well, you never talk to your parents again.
Yeah, right. No, I think that's very true.
And I think that's kind of an anxiety that everybody has of just when you have connections with people that they're not necessarily going to last because they could end up in an Eco Urb and you can't contact them. So I think there's just a lot of underlying stress to extended relationships.
Yeah.
But I think that helps intra Eco Urb communities become stronger because that's your only support system and everyone's kind of going through a similar thing.
Right. Yeah. You're all on a similar yeah. No, I like that.
I really like it because it also shows leaving your Eco Urb in the next stage, when we're playing the game is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
People, it's just still an anxiety people have where it's oh, we fixed everything, but it's but what if it breaks again?
Yeah, it could always go wrong again.
Yeah, leaving the Eco Urb is not a death sentence, but it has a note of finality that travel nowadays doesn't have.
Yeah, no, I like that idea that it's not as guaranteed because they saw the whole thing fall apart once and know it could happen again if two moons run into each other or, something else happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I like that. What do we think? How do we think this affects society? You're in a normal Eco Urb, you're living your life, communication goes down, and then you start hearing, birds about we gotta build spaceships again. How do we think people feel about that? And how do we think that impacts, day-to-day life in this era?
Are you ready for my cult?
Huh? Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do it.
So I think there is a group that forms a new religion that praises the ring, the new ring that is formed, They believe that is the creation of a new god, and they believe that satellites are against that god's will, because the god's first act was to destroy all communications and satellites, so they are very unhappy that we are immediately remaking satellites.
I want to put a pin in that, and I do want to come back to it because it is following into my next question that I want to ask. So remember your creepy cult, because I like it, and it will play into a question that I had. So
that's fine, but I think part of society, I think though a lot of society is in favor, and we can flesh that out more, I think there is a small sect of people who are like, no, it is not natural. We are affecting space, and like just because there's nothing there doesn't mean putting stuff in there is not affecting it, kind of thing. Well,
yeah, and I mean nothing's there. They don't. If they're cultish about this, they maybe don't think it's nothing. Maybe it's ether, and you shouldn't be messing with it. It's not our domain. That's where the gods live.
Right.
I think that works, and it does kind of play into like it's the extreme extension of what Mandy said, that the Eco Urbs got a little bit more religious as people had to like find communities and support structures, and there was kind of like a return to more nature worship in some capacity, because like Eco Urbs were so centered around preservation, and because so much of the planet was just becoming wilderness again. So that's kind of like you scooch that an inch too far, and you get a cult that's like, no, don't mess with space. That's the most significant nature. You gotta leave it alone. You get you get that as a natural extension.
And I think some extremists of that probably have sabotaged like supply lines and stuff, or like destroyed roads that were being built, or interrupted riverboats or things like that. And I don't think that's most of the people who don't think it should be messed with. But there's definitely outliers.
I like that. Mandy, you had a finger up.
So I think with the youth, there's a lot of starry-eyedness towards like the skies and space now, because the rare person who is able to get on a bird and fly that's brand new. That's super exciting. There's a lot of like kids who play being like the what did we call it? Like the bird mailman or whatever.
Yeah.
Can we call it airmail?
Oh yeah.
I think there's a lot of that. I think there's definitely a renewed interest in space, and for a lot of kids in some of these Eco Urbs, it's not an option to be a part of the Exula program, because you kind of have to be more in the city. But I think that kind of, renews the vigor to like want to go to other Eco Urbs for knowledge and learning how to be a part of that.
No, I think that's cool as a, that would be the one story, right? Is the crew, the, whatever we want to call them. We can just call them astronauts because you didn't like the name I came up with. But, it's mostly people that are close by that they could train and all that stuff. But they did, have to go to one way far out Eco Urb and get like this one dude who's got like some specific expertise, like he's one of the best astronomers. They needed him to be able to like judge moon locations so they don't run into any of them while they're up there working on the satellites. And it's like this heroic story of like this one guy from the like bumpkin land that got, drug into being an astronaut and had to get traveled all the way over there through like, trials and tribulations going through the wild and through patchworked riverboats and all this stuff,
Well, and not to write things that I know I kind of have established for my character much later on, but I think the idea of like being able to go to another Eco Urb to like be a part of a bigger school or college type of a situation gets planted here, that, my Eco Urb that's way out on the coast isn't doing anything with the Exula program or space. So, if you're the kid whose passion is that, how do you get to that point?
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting that this is kind of like has like a rebirth of like a need for not necessarily formal like costed education, but that like it's a wake up call that we have to continue transitioning knowledge to generations below us, even if the Eco Urbs don't immediately require them.
Well, and specialized knowledge isn't going to be at every single Eco Urb.
Right. So there is some need for travel for that. You know, if it's you want to go to one specific Eco Urb to get an education in X, Y, or Z, but that becomes a realization that society was at risk of losing that because it was like, if we like lost this one guy, there was only a few backups. Like it was a finite number of people that could do this job. Yeah. So that makes sense that it's kind of like a realization that you need to start educating a little bit more rigorously maybe than they had been when they were just surviving. Mm-hmm. And in like the post, what was it called in Ireland? Like the Troubles. It's kind of what this was, right? Like this.
I don't know what you're talking about, but
there was like
it's the Troubles.
It was the 70s where it was kind of like.
I think it was later than that, but yeah.
I'll look it up afterwards.
Maybe it was as late as the 90s.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was early 90s when it finally got less troubled.
It was like skirmishes in Ireland around their independence for years.
Irish independence, and then what to do with Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland was still part of the United Kingdom, and so
but anyways, so kind of like that time frame, people were less worried about traveling far for education and more worried about just dealing with conflict or whatever. So I think that's a good addition, that like this is kind of a new college communities are forming.
I was gonna say, on like an arts note, I was gonna suggest that with the lack of like entertainment and communication with other Eco Urbs, as well as the resurgence in interest in travel and mythology and that sort of thing, that audio dramas about like goddesses and also adventure stories about airmail carriers and sort of like superhero stories, but involving the goddesses and like demigods and that sort of thing.
Well, I kind of like the idea of, these travelers, whether it's riverboats or the airmail people, meeting deities pretty frequently, especially airmail people who fly way up in the sky where the deities are,
Yeah.
Definitely a bunch of like really cheesy love stories about like, she flies off on her lonely thing and then meets a god in the sky and
like
they fall in love,
earth, Yeah.
I read a lot of cringy books. I'm sorry.
No, I think totally, because that plays into like, one, everybody's desire to like connect with people outside of their Eco Urb, and also the romance of traveling and seeing more of the world and all that.
Yeah.
To tack on to that, I think this is the first time, like with the long caravan journeys, like you have a lot of art and writings about the wilds in a way. Before it was just like, we have to save the planet, we don't really care what happens in the wilds. And now you have people who are traveling through basically what has been reclaimed and seeing the beauty of it. And like you have people who are basically Henry David Thoreauing it, being like, and then I sat on the wagon and I saw a pond and a frog leaped into the pond and it was beautiful.
Get a lot of poetry.
You get a lot of like nature poetry. And this is, I think, when, I don't think it's common, but there's like every so often someone's like, I'm going to go explore the wilds and not like ruin it, but just be like,
go on a walk.
What's out there? I want to see, like it starts being like what our characters are going to kind of do.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is when this profession starts starting up, where people are like in Eco Urbs, like, if I don't break anything, I can go explore like 10 miles that way, can't I? And people are like, I guess. You can't build a house.
Rules about that will come later. All right. So does anyone else? Well, actually, okay. So I'm listening to music right now, and this is a question I haven't asked before. And I'll say this is one that's fraught for the possibility of a lot of ums. So I'm sorry about that. What do we think music is like?
It's fraught with a lot of ums, I think. I would say it's like whatever musical instruments you can make.
Well, and I would like to add on my own couple things here is you really can't, there wasn't like streaming music, right? And transporting physical mass media music wouldn't really be a thing until it could be done without having to stamp CDs or tapes, right? Because those are incredibly wasteful and just get thrown away eventually, right? It's tons of plastic that gets thrown away. So physically transporting tons of CDs, probably not happening, or tapes or records or whatever. So what is music is going to exist? What do we think?
Okay, y'all can totally shoot this down. But I think, okay, so one, instruments aren't being mass produced at this point. So if you have an instrument from before Eco Urbs, like it's very, very precious. Like this is something that you take care of because who knows if you could ever get like a trumpet again at this point. And it's going to obviously vary per Eco Urb because no one knows what instruments other people have. But I think you end up getting like Renaissance type music where it's instruments that more people can play. Drums are going to be really easy to make. It's not a xylophone. What am I thinking?
Marimba.
Yeah, things like that are going to be easier to make in an Eco Urb setting. So I think it's more music like that starts coming back.
I have an addition that I want to make that's going to make everyone that's super into music cringe really hard.
Uh-oh.
They don't have a way to transfer sound between Eco Urbs. And when that happened, no one was thinking that hard about we should set some standards. So nobody tunes to the same note, even close.
I hate it.
That's
like,
awful.
I hate it.
No.
Not even kind of. It's
No.
like you look at a piece of sheet music, like maybe they could send sheet music, and it's like an E might be a third step off between all of the different Eco Urbs, you know?
It makes sense. It hurts in my soul, but it makes sense.
No, I love it though, actually, because I like the idea that you can tell where music is from based on like what
Oh,
notes
on
it
their
actually.
tuning? That's fascinating.
Well, I mean, that's kind of like what happened in our real world is that for a long time, I think A was 442 or 438. It was slightly off of the 440 we use now. So if you have like a really old piano and try to tune it to like today's stuff, it won't be right.
Yeah.
It'll sound weird.
Yeah, so it's all slightly off tune.
The other thing I think is I think there's another branch of music that was like non-existent that was born, and it's just jug bands are really popular.
When you say jug band, so I actually witnessed and was friends with members of a jug band, which has a specific implication to me. Do you mean like wash tub bass or like, yeah, wash tub bass, washboard,
Yes.
spoons, and jug?
Stuff like that. It's like this world's equivalent of that. It's just like stuff that you can make out of normal objects.
Okay, I like that. Improvised musical instruments. I think that also lends itself to a lot of Eco Urbs having their own unique music scenes as a result.
Yeah.
Because they all, you know...
They have different excess materials.
Yeah, so the instruments are kind of based on that. So it's very scattershot, and there aren't super standardized instruments.
It's like the microbrewing scene for like beer right now, where it's just like every place is just like slightly different, but they're all kind of the same. Or it's just like, oh, this Eco Urb, we use spoons. It's like, well, we use sporks. And I'm like, okay, but it's basically the same, but they're like really...
Metal clackies, I get it, you know.
But they're very like, oh no, this is like the real way you play it. You like, the only way you can play this is with spoons. If you use any other metallic clanky things, it does not count as this music.
Well, and I like the idea too that then there's like 3 or 4 Eco Urbs where it just happened to be that one of the people that moved there like makes violins and knows how, you know, like we got the one guy that hand makes violins, so you go there and it's like Baroque music, like, you know, and then I want to rip my own ears off.
I was just going to suggest that singing and like a cappella is a lot more common.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
like in Eco Urbs that don't have a lot of like excess materials to be used for musical instruments, that it's like a pretty minimalist sort of setup, and that singing is just really common and prized.
So this is a thing, I don't know if this stands up to rigor if you're a music theorist. So, music theorist, I'm going to apologize for what I'm about to say. So, I think the band is I don't know, it's somewhere in like Central Asia, right? This band that my brother sent me. But it's like very far divorced from country western music in the United States. And I started listening to it and I'm like, why does this sound like country western music? He's like, because they both use a galloping beat that sounds like a horse. And I'm like, oh, that's exactly what it is. Because it uses the same like feel of a beat that feels like a horse, which is where that probably came from. Because that culture was like very steeped in horses, and so was country western music, right? So I like the idea that there are genres of music that are birthed from like natural rhythms that people might have seen, right?
Like wing beats of birds.
Yeah, and that sometimes those are consistent around different cultures, but you get weird remixes of like what that music is. Like maybe this place had enough like, you know, weird electrical engineers to make electrical instruments, you know? And so you get like electronic wing beat music, and then you also get like people literally playing like feather flappers as some kind of instrument. I like that. That's kind of a fun idea.
Love it.
Now here's an idea. I was just imagining, because I mean, this exists in our real world where, like, we talked about how tuning isn't the same across Eco Urbs, but what about even the tuning system that they use is not the same? Because like we have that where
like quarter tones. Versus,
in a lot of especially Indian music, they use like quarter tones and things that aren't like, we can't really even equate to our like what we would like the 12-tone musical scale.
Right,
like,
yeah.
I was imagining at one point some Eco Urb got hyper focused on decimalizing everything, and they're like, screw the 12-tone system, we're going 10 tones.
Oh yeah.
Just breaking all of our music brains, yeah. Well, and then that's kind of fun, like as a not to put the cart before the horse, but you know, like when satellite communication finally gets back up and running again and gets good enough that people could hear each other's music, like, what? What's this?
What have y'all been doing?
I also, and you can tell me this is a bad idea, but I like the idea that like old pop music basically becomes classical music, like how we view classical music, because like having like these manufactured instruments is like hard, so you train on them and you get really good at them, and people are like, oh, this is like high art music, even though it's just like pop songs, kind of like
I just had something pop in my head where it's like, oh, this is classical historic music, and it's just Gucci Gang.
it's basically the joke from Futurama where he's like sitting around listening to, it's like they walk in, he's listening to Big Butts, and he's like, Fry, you can't sit here all day listening to classical music.
I think maybe it's, there is like that, there's like some musical genre schisms around like, what they might call quality music versus unquality music or something like that, you know, where it's not exactly classical in that, like, I think that maybe a distinction on classical music is like scale and complexity, you know, which is separate from its instrument. But like production quality of the instruments themselves becomes like almost its own genre,
yes.
You know, where, oh, you know what it is? It's like that thing where people like, it's a culinary thing now where it's like, I like to let the food speak for itself. So I just cook a steak unseasoned in a thin layer of oil. So you really taste the steak without any seasonings. And then there's people that are like, and then you dump garlic butter and cheese on it, right? So it's people that are like, I just let the instrument speak for itself. And they have like one really nice instrument and just like play an open chord, and they're like, listen to all the overtones and resonance, you know? And then there's the jug band just being like, how many instruments can we put in? You know how to play forks? Perfect. You know, get that as the counterpoint.
That better be a guy we meet.
Well, yeah, now you are going to meet jug band people. This is great because I just keep getting NPCs added in.
All right. I think we've answered your music question. You
did. It was not full of a bunch of ums, so good job. You've added a lot to society.
We have solved your music puzzle.
You don't want me to put a music puzzle in our next, like, you know, dungeon diving RPG. That'll be really painful.
I do want a music puzzle.
You say that?
I liked the music puzzle in Myst.
You say that, but you don't.
I did.
Did I do a music? Oh, we didn't. Caitlin, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. It was horrible.
No, I liked it. I liked it originally.
We are off topic. We are not discussing how much Myst was bad.
To be continued. Okay. So, kicking back a few steps here, we've discussed how society has changed. I like the idea of this kind of hero worship of, you know, like higher learning to get to space as a new revived thing. Talked about music, how Eco Urbs communicate. Zach, you brought this up and I want to delve into it a little bit more, which is both people that oppose the idea of fixing the satellites, and then do we think there are people that are opting out of society? And what are those people and how does society handle them? Like, what does an Eco Urb do if, like, Tim goes, hey, you know what? I'm not doing this, and leaves with, like, 5 other guys. And they're like, we're going to go do whatever we're going to do. You know, like, what does society do with its people that are trying not to participate in society?
I honestly don't think there's much they can do because they don't have... Well, there isn't like a police force or anything like that or a military.
We haven't really talked about that. If there is an Eco Urb police force.
Okay, the way that I feel like we've set this up, it doesn't seem like there would be one, but I don't know if maybe there's like a sheriff or something. If there is one, I feel like it would be pretty small. So if you have a group of like 5 guys who just go off, like I feel like you can't tell them no. And it's almost like, what is a small amount of people out in the wilds going to do? Well,
and then that kind of gets to a question is how sanctified, is that the right word? How, that's not the right word, sacred?
Sanctioned?
Well, yeah. How do people view the wilds and going out into it? You know, like messing with the wilds is bad, right? So if those people are explicitly going out to live in them, that kind of implies they're going to be cutting down trees, making houses, and impacting this forest that they are letting return to keep the planet from, you know, losing its mind again like it did when they had monocropped the whole world, right? So how does society handle people then that want to maybe act in a way that is counter to Eco Urbs?
I think, at least with my cult, I think the majority of them are like more annoyed that the Eco Urbs aren't doing enough to live with nature. They're like upset, like it's kind of that thing. It's like what we're doing now is good, but it's not far enough. We just need to completely commune with the trees. So they just like aren't actually building houses. They're just like wandering nomads who like have like a tarp that they sleep under.
Gotcha.
And I think for those people, the Eco Urbs don't really care because they're not really affecting nature.
Okay.
Like, obviously being in nature affects it, but they're not like, they're like, no, houses are bad. The whole planet needs to be just the wilds, and we need to be traveling nomads where we have collapsible tents, and we build nothing permanent, and then we just live off the land like that. And I think the Eco Urbs are like, fine, cool, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Clarification question. How long has it been since the big storm where everyone figured out that we needed to start these Eco Urbs? Is it still in living memory?
So Generation 1, right, was, because our first episode was basically pre-Generation 1, right? Because Generation 1 was the first move out to Eco Urbs where it was like halfway and didn't really work. And then 2 was the problem of those being, you know, those becoming basically like labor pools for corporations. Then 3 was the Eco Urbs kind of declaring their independence, fighting off attempts at reclamation, and then now our 4th one is us all now working together as a society to solve a problem, right? I would say at this point now there is no one alive from that first era. Like, we have moved well past that. Like, there was probably, if not one, maybe a couple of generations of people that remembered the constant skirmishes between the cities and the Eco Urbs, right? Mm-hmm. That was a long time. That it wasn't like constant bloodshed. It was constant squabbles. You know, it never erupted, or maybe it did a few times, but generally, you know, it was just, they were vying for power, but they never really could marshal enough people. And basically, you're waiting for the cities to die out naturally, right? They weren't starving to death, but the population there was getting older and older and older, and the population in the Eco Urbs was getting younger and younger and younger, and eventually those people were just not going to exist anymore, you know?
Okay, so at this point, the oldest person in an Eco Urb would not have lived through the initial Eco Urb and like all of the everything that led to the planet saying or to the people saying that we need Eco Urbs.
Yeah, those people have, you know, are let's say it's been over 100 years since then. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought like each age was like kind of like 100 years.
I don't know if it's that many, but it's also, I'm okay with it being kind of vague. You know, it's at this point, people are starting to forget, maybe, you know.
Yeah. In that case, I think that changes how I think some people act. So at this point, I think Eco Urbs are very comfortable for most people.
Yeah, they should be nice. Yeah, at this point, it's comfort. Yeah.
So you've got, let's say, you got 5 to 10 people who are like, no, we want to go back out into the wilds and start something. I don't think we've come together enough at this point to have specific rules. But if those people go out and they don't come back, I think that reinforces to the people in the Eco Urbs that they should not be going out and doing that.
Makes sense.
Even though you might have some groups of people that go out, as far as the general population can tell, oh, they're just dead. They're like, something happened to them. They didn't come back. We don't know what happened to them. They're not communicating with us. So do we really want to be in a situation where we're not able to talk to people or get what we need? So I think
it's like a self-imposed disaster is kind of how it's framed. Like you're going to a place where you're cutting off communication. And we all hated that when that happened to us. Yeah.
Well, and if there is somebody that comes back, I don't think it's there to recruit, because if these random groups have made their way out there, they're probably like, I don't see them coming back and being like, hey, you should join us. Like, maybe there's the occasional person, but that's not the majority of what happens.
Sure.
I don't think so, yeah.
I think also, with the rise of pulp explorer fiction going on, these groups that got into the wilderness are often now like the bad guys in the wilderness that these explorers find.
That kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Like, not necessarily like they actually find them in real life. I'm sure some of them find them, but in the stories, it's just like, and then I was almost murdered by these people who are crazy trying to hug trees all day.
That makes sense.
Or just people who left their community, ditched.
They're framed as poachers.
Abandoned. Yeah, abandoned their sustainable life. And I think it's framed as selfish to do that.
Well, and it would also be detrimental to the planet. The books would be there's no way to survive out there that isn't hurting. You come onto a peaceful river valley that's been all torn up because, there's these people out here that are now wrecking shop or whatever.
Well, and realistically, if you have if you do have just a very small group who decides they're going to cut down trees, that's not good if everyone decided to do that. But I think that's the other reason why generally the people in charge are just kind of ignoring the problem, other than maybe making them sound like the bad guys. Because it's well, if you got a handful of people out in this vast wild, either they're not going to make it or they're going to affect the environment so little that...
Yeah, as long as the numbers don't get too big, yeah.
Yeah, because what are they going to do out there? If they start growing, that's when it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do we think there are walls around Eco Urbs?
We established that they did during the skirmish age.
Okay. So is that kind of the border between wild and not wild, as they have some kind of wall,
Yeah, I think so. And I think that if people left and then came back or tried to trade because they needed something, something breaks out there and they have to go to an Eco Urb to get it, I think that they're going to be charged an arm and a leg. And within the community, it can be a lot more bartery or I can help you build this thing if you help me do whatever. And because there's not that ongoing relationship, people are just a lot less willing to trade with them or work with them, or they want a lot more assurances that they're going to get something valuable.
That makes sense.
Right. Oh, because a lot of, in the Eco Urbs, all of your necessities are communal, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's working to help everyone out. But if it's someone that's left and comes in, needs something, is going to leave again, well, they're not contributing.
Right.
I also think the walls now are less geared toward skirmishes and more toward whatever the wildlife is around the area.
Yeah.
Because that's coming back, yeah.
Yeah, so you probably have less mirrors set up for laser things and more just depending on what is your wildlife that wants to kill you.
Yep. No, I like that idea. I think that's a good idea.
I think there's a lot. I want there to be house-mounted laser turrets for the birds.
He's got a laser to direct the big cats away.
Yeah.
You point the laser pointer at the birds, and then the cats jump up and kill the birds. It's very complicated. It's like the raptor gun from one of the Jurassic World movies.
It's the circle of life.
I forgot that existed in those movies. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there was a raptor gun, where you'd shoot a laser at a guy and then a raptor would kill him. Doesn't matter. Anyways, moving on from Jurassic World, moving back to society at large. So we've kind of talked about there are some people that oppose the space program. I know that was 30 minutes ago. So how aggressive do you think that was? Like just trying to stop supplies, stealing stuff, maybe a little bit of violence, but there was never like large civil unrest about the idea of sending something into space?
I like the idea, since it's been a long time, of them going back to how skirmishes used to be like in the past, where it's like, oh, we just like steal stuff, like capture the flag. And they're like, we're going back to the old natural ways, like thinking that they're like being more eco-friendly. Like it's far enough away that they're like completely misinterpreting what was happening there.
Oh, yeah.
Where
that's
they're like, they're like, we're doing this symbolic representation by being more eco-friendly by just stealing crops like they used to. And it's like, well, no, that was the opposite.
Yeah, I kind of like that. There's like a built-in hypocrisy or ignorance to it. Yeah. But we don't think there was ever like large-scale unrest about sending something to space.
I think no, because they were disconnected enough that they couldn't really like have a large group movement.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So they were just kind of randomly, sometimes in the wild. Were those people that you think didn't live in Eco Urbs, or was that Eco Urb, like people living in Eco Urbs would sometimes be a little bit culty?
I think there was both. I think the zealots are the ones out in the wilderness.
Yeah, there's like a range.
Yeah. I think the religious fanatics are the ones who are out in the wilderness, but I think there is like churches to the ring god.
No, I think that makes sense. Well, and maybe that like that's not even necessarily seen as a bad thing. Like some people are like, yeah, it's a new god. It's two gods went to war and birthed another god. That's fine. That doesn't mean that we can't go to space. And there's people that are like, well, we probably shouldn't go to space. The gods might not like that. Things might get worse. And there's people that are like, sink the boats,
Yeah, I think that all makes sense.
Cool. I like that. So the space program is eventually completed, successful, finishes the rocket, launches. It's kind of a moment of triumph. I think that maybe like delegates from a bunch of different Eco Urbs managed to make their way to this to sort of witness this historic moment, maybe write about it, because there wouldn't be like broadcast of this, right? Since this is kind of meant to fix the issue if there's no television or even audio broadcast of seeing something so momentous. So maybe photography is used to capture a few still images of this rocket launching into space for the first time. And then, you have to wait, right? Maybe it's a week-long mission where all the Eco Urbs are just waiting there. They have their delegates way out in the middle of the desert, sitting there like on communications, waiting to see if they can hear someone back in their Eco Urb talk back, or whatever. And that's like, oh, that's probably like a holiday, right? It's like reconnection day or whatever is when, all these people that sent their friends and family way off into the desert to test the communications all finally, heard from their loved ones again as the Eco Urbs were suddenly able to communicate again. I kind of like that as an idea.
I like that. And that's a day that you spend with you talk to your family. Like, right. It doesn't matter how far away they are. Like, you make an effort to spend time with your family and like get on the phone with people.
So it's like their equivalent of Thanksgiving.
I don't think it's necessarily travel, but maybe.
Well, I don't know about the travel, but like Thanksgiving is very much like a spend time with your family holiday, know? Like there's not religious significance with Thanksgiving. It is just being grateful that you have family.
Well, and maybe it's one of those things that's like preceded by like a certain like a day of silence where you don't talk to your family. And then, the next day is supposed to be a party that, and then it would like last for as long as one of the satellites is in the sky, because there'd have to be more than one for it to work all the time. So there might actually have needed to be like 3 or 4 or 5 different launches to get all the communications back up. So it's like the actual holiday is this like day of silence, and then however long that satellite's in the sky, you have like this party where you just talk to all your family again, But it would have been like a scattershot thing of, them fixing one satellite. You can talk for like half the day, and then, they had to fix the next one. But That first phone call is the one that everyone celebrates.
Right, yeah.
Well, I like how they, like, as they add more satellites, it becomes more and more, like, you can talk anytime, all the time.
Yeah.
But, like,
right.
Symbolically, they just, like, know where the first satellite is always. So it's like, during that day, it's like, oh, like, we can talk all day, but we only party for, like, while the first satellite's there still. I think that's really cool.
Right, yeah, that's, like, the big celebration is, you know, first satellite comes over the horizon and everyone's like, yay, we can talk again. Yeah, I like that idea. All right, so next stage is kind of talking through basically what a final Eco Urb looks like, and specifically our Eco Urb that we're going to be based out of. So that's going to be a lot of planning around that next week. So next week, the format's going to be a little bit different because there kind of isn't going to be as much. There's going to be some big picture stuff, but there isn't going to be nearly as much big picture stuff. So yeah, that's next week.
We're going to be introducing everybody to Stormy Banks.
Yes, our Eco Urb. Thanks for listening to this episode of Wanderlust. Music for this show is credited down below. If you like this campaign, you can find more of our shows at the Wandering Gamer website or on Podbean. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Links in the description. Now bear in mind, in the wilds, some wander to get lost, and some wander to find themselves.